Good afternoon and welcome to Sunday Brunch with Higher Heights, powered by the SIP. And your SIP host, Adrienne Shropshire from Black Pack, Fatima Goss-Grays from the National Women's Law Center, Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project, Tracy Sturdivant from the League, and I am Glenda Carr from Higher Heights. And y'all, we are all back, which means it is fall. Not officially, but honey, it's fall. Summer is over. I am mourning the loss of summer. So thank you for joining the SIP Hour, a space for Black women to be informed, engage, and to take action. So let us know where you are watching from, what city, state, what part of the room, and are you too mourning the loss of summer? As you can see, all your SIP hosts are all back, and we are ready for the final drive into the end of the year. Lots of things happening. Today's conversation is centering around our babies, y'all, and their mental wellness. This has been a tough year for all of us, and I think it is time for us to pause and talk about how our young people are surviving and hopefully figuring out a way that they can continue to thrive and find joy in this moment. And so we will be in conversation about the mental wellness of Black children during COVID-19 and frankly, the attack on Blackness. But before then, couple of just conversations. I've been watching the US Open major fail. I missed Naomi live, but as you know, Naomi Osaka won the US Open yesterday and has been boldly leading as a Black woman the entire US Open, rocking her masks, paying tribute and drawing attention to African Americans who have been killed by police brutality in this country. Anyone else watching the US Open?
Yes. I mean, I loved it. I have to say, I was rooting for the Naomi-Serena matchup again. Serena had been so wronged, but there was something special about watching Naomi each time, and she's so young, but just sort of go out there confidently, talk to people and say, I'm hoping you're gonna have a conversation about Blackness. That's why I'm wearing these masks. It was amazing. So congratulations to her and to all of the sports activists who are leading the way in this time.
Yeah, I was just one of the great things about her is just also like how humble she is. And even when asked about why she was wearing the mask, she said, you know, it was kind of like, well, I know it's something like silly or something little, but I think for her to also understand that the platform she has, which is international, right? Like that, it's very important. And it gets to like this thing of like anything that you can do, wherever you are, wherever you're standing, whatever platform you have to be lifting up the issues is important.
And I think that, that was joy for this weekend, but as you know, there's a lot of things happening, including the fires out west, which is where Adrienne and her family originate from, and many of her family are still living out west. Adrienne, share a little bit of your thoughts about, the fires.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it definitely ties into this conversation that we're having today about the impact of COVID on our kids and their mental health, because there's so much happening right now that's impacting them and their mental health. And that includes the fact that the entire West Coast is on fire right now. And if people did not ever believe in climate change before, if you were skeptical about climate change before, you should not be skeptical right now, because what is happening in California and Oregon and Washington State is absolutely about climate change and our inability to address this, existential threat that is with us now. It's not coming, it's with us. And so we've seen whole towns burn down. There's, where the death toll is at about 30 people have lost their homes. The air quality is terrible. My sister posted on Facebook today that she had these headaches for 3 days and she couldn't figure it out. And it's because the windows were open. And she was going in and out. And so they turned into migraines, right? So the sort of quality impact on people's health is significant. We've seen the pictures from San Francisco, red skies. This is climate change. And it is affecting all of us. And there are real implications for our future if we cannot get this under control.
And also, how do you evacuate in a pandemic? There's like this added kind of issue around being safe and evacuation that is both for them and for the Gulf Coast, which is getting ready to get hit by another hurricane.
Well, we saw whole families in stadiums, kids running around the track trying to find things to do. I mean, it's devastating.
Well, speaking of devastating, I woke up this morning, yesterday, and saw this, this social media video that was going on social media. And this morning they covered it here on the news in Atlanta. Another, violent attack on an innocent man and his wife and his daughter riding in an Uber that got pulled over in Clayton County here in Georgia. They pulled over the driver for a broken tail light, and then allegedly asked, his name is Roderick Walker, for his ID, to which he asked, "Why are you asking for my ID? I wasn't driving, I hadn't done anything wrong." And it escalated. And if you haven't seen this video, on one hand, I don't want folks to watch this video because we're talking about sort of being traumatized, but we also need to see, what is happening in our communities to folk. And they, on the ground, 2 police officers, beating him. The images of him after this attack are unfathomable. Like, I literally was tearing up this morning when I saw the video of him and, his mother sort of talking about his condition. They locked him up, took him to jail, but his wife was standing there sort of videotaping. There was also a sort of a bystander who had stopped and, was filming. And in that video, you could see Roderick's daughter in the car just screaming, in the back of this Uber at the top of their lungs, asking these police officers to stop, him saying that he couldn't breathe, and them continuing, to apply this excessive force. And it's just, one of those moments where it's like, even in the midst of this conversation, even in the midst of the uprisings, that we're continuing to see this type of behavior. So it was the Clayton County Sheriff's Office, not the local police. And so now they are in the process of doing an investigation. The family is calling for an independent investigation because they're like, we just don't want the police doing an investigation of the police. So this case is, evolving in real time. And just once again, as we're sort of getting ready to have this conversation about our children, like, they are being traumatized in real time by this as well. So it's just really hard, with all of the things that are going on and trying to, COVID and the fires, and like this continues to be an ongoing, attack on our community. So it's just all bad.
All bad. And we also should just mention, like, the trauma of Black women bearing witness to this brutality by filming episode after episode. So when we think about the ones that we've seen recently on film, Black women standing there bearing witness with their iPhones to this tragedy and sort of horrific events, and in some cases, as in this case, with their children by their side.
In this case, what was so interesting, it was a Black cop who was pushing her back. It was two white officers, who were trying to restrain him. And there was this Black cop saying, you need to back up, or we're gonna lock you up too. And it's like, are you serious? Or you could tell them, hey, stop.
Right.
Instead of telling me to back up, why would you tell them to stop?
This is exactly why when people say, oh, we just need to hire more Black cops, that ain't fixing it.
That ain't the answer, because this is how they are taught, right? We didn't see anything wrong. Like, this is by the book in their mind. So the book needs to change. Like, that's what it's all about.
That's right.
Don't forget to share the feed. We need people to join our conversation. We're going to be leading into our next part of the show, but share the feed. You can go on Facebook and do a watch party, or you can just share it outright. So please.
Well, thanks. Well, I actually think that conversation is a really good segue into our conversation today about our kids. And I have kids who are in elementary school and middle school, and I know Adrian and Judy have older kids. And honestly, at every age and every stage, even the young kiddo that Tracy has, we're worried. And I have to say, when distance learning started around the country, I noticed that parents had this shell-shocked look. You would see them, their eyes were big. They were like, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. And again, it made me even more worried about the kids. So we are lucky to have with us in this conversation two experts. We are joined by Dr. Kimberly Johnson-Hatchett, who is a board certified neurologist and neuropsychologist, and also the principal partner at Kindred. And we also have Dr. Sarah Vinson, who's a board certified child and adolescent psychiatrist and a sought after clinician, consultant, and speaker. Thank you to both of you for being in conversation with us today. If we could just start with, before we even get to the distance learning, what our kids are witnessing. And at every age, there is a version of them absorbing that part of the country is literally on fire, right? That part of what we have seen made so visible is attacks on Blackness. How are kids managing this and grappling with all of this information? And for parents, what should we be doing?
So, Dr. Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure. So I would say the first question is, how are the parents dealing with the information?
We're not.
We're not okay.
So kids do what you do, not necessarily what you say or tell them to do, right? So there's so much power in you modeling, talking about your feelings, naming your emotions, it being okay to acknowledge feeling afraid or not understanding or being confused, and seeing what they're thinking and how they're making sense of it too. Because so much of how they deal with this is going to mirror how you're dealing with it. And I talk to, in my role as a child psychiatrist, I'm really a family psychiatrist, right? Because every child is in the context of a family, and that family is in the context of a society. So part of my work is always helping the parents, because if they're not in a good place, they can't give the kids what they themselves don't have. And that includes coping skills and understanding about things that are going on in the broader community.
And so, like, also from a neurological standpoint, there are manifestations of stress that come out neurologically. People have increased headaches. You have increased like migraine headaches, tension headaches. Then you have neuropsychological things that can happen. So people can have episodes that look like seizures, but they're not. So they actually are outlets of stress. And so we're seeing that more and more, even in the adult population. I don't see children, I see mainly adults. And the increase in headaches, increase in migraines, that is a real manifestation that we have seen since the pandemic has started, as well as since all of the awakening, the racial awakening that's been happening in this country. Black and white, we're seeing a lot of people really open their eyes to seeing that things are just as bad as they've been for, since our inception, our country's inception.
It's so interesting that you say that, Dr. Kim, because my 4-year-old just turned 4 last week. Our kids share a birthday. Recently, I said, I have a headache. I'm like, a headache? 4 years old talking about you have a headache. And I keep going like, well, I said, where? And he'll go, inside. And then, because he's still trying to develop the language for it. We just moved from New York down to Atlanta, and I was, sharing with folks at the top of the show that, every so often he will say to me, I miss New York, but I like our Atlanta house, because that means he likes the space and having a playroom. But there's something about his experience having been in New York that was normalcy, right? His ability to play with friends, his ability to go outside and just be without a mask. For his birthday, he said, who's coming to my birthday party? I said, so I went, me and your daddy? So I literally went back to our neighbors. We've talked to them maybe 2 or 3 times, and they have 2 little boys that are 4 and 5, and we see them playing outside. And I went knock on this woman's door with a mask. I said, hey, I'm Tracy. Nice to meet you. So listen, my kid, today's his birthday. Want to come over for cake and ice cream? 5 minutes. I got some hand wipes. I felt like this sense of like responsibility to try to create some semblance of normalcy for him, right? Yeah. And I know that parents are struggling with that, even with folks who are sending their kids back to school, right? In this. So talk to us a little bit about, we all of our kids are sort of different ages, but like how they are processing, or like what are some tips as they are all trying to verbalize to us in their own ways this sort of sense of loneliness and fear. Like what are some things that we can do because we're feeling lonely and also have our own fear? Like how do we navigate that? Sarah, I'll start with you.
Sure. So when there's so much going on in the world that is bad and outside of your control, it's really important to really be intentional about focusing on what is in your control. So the structure in your home, the routine in your home, making sure everybody's getting enough sleep, incorporating movement. I don't say exercise, because sometimes you say exercise, people look at you funny. Movement into your routines. These are all things that we know are protective for adults and for kids when it comes to your mental well-being, that we can still do even as it feels like the wheels are falling off of the world around us. The other thing I'll say too is that people can be in the same house, they can be in the same room, and still not be present with each other. Something that I've seen and kind of worried about with COVID is that people are around each other all the time, but they may not necessarily be present and interacting. And even before, I would see, families in airports or different places, and everyone was on their individual device, including the parents. And so they were in the same space, but not actually interacting. And so even though you're around each other all the time and you may see less of a need to do things, activities as a family, it's still really important to do that, because you don't want to mistake proximity physically for true interaction. And we know that when it comes to kids and their mental well-being, quality time with their parents, and that's why things like family dinners are so important, really does go a long way. So it's the simple stuff that sounds really simple that we know can go a long way in terms of mental health for kids.
That is so true.
That's so helpful. I have been, we have dinner at the dining room or kitchen table together every night. Like I've been very adamant about making sure that we have that time to connect with one another in that way. Dr. Kim?
One thing that I think I know that we're doing, because I have a 4 and a 5-year-old, is when my kids say, Mom, will you play with me? I stop and play with them. Whatever I'm doing, even if I'm busy, sometimes I have my computer and I'm charting at the same time as being whichever Malibu Barbie, whatever that I have to be. But I'm like, Malibu Barbie's typing this note. And so they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll go over here. But I'm in the room, in the playroom, trying to be with them. Another thing, I think I echo what Dr. Sarah was saying with the tablets, is that we have found that like e-learning is good for a moment, but it's not the type of learning that can be cemented as well as maybe a combination or even in-person learning. And so having the kids on that tablet all the time, using it, and I know I was guilty of this. When the pandemic started, I had to still do my clinics, and we quickly became virtual clinics. But my kids were out of the daycare closed, the state shut down. So the kids are there. And at first I was like, okay, here's your curriculum. That lasted like 3 days. And I was like, here is ABC Mouse.
That's right.
The letter for the day is C. And the number for the day is 2, which is also dos in Spanish. Got your learning for today. Move on. It was rough. It was really rough. But that routine, getting rid of the tablet at dinner time and at every meal. We don't do tablets or cell phones at any meal, so that we talk to each other. You're forced to really have conversations. And like our 4 and 5-year-old understand the fires. We have protected their innocence from they understand that they are Black, and they understand that that's different. And in their mind, that's good. We're Black, we're brown, we're good. But we haven't exposed them to the reality of what that means just yet, because they're so young. But they do understand the fires, and they ask about that a lot. And like, why is it on fire? Well, what does that mean? The environment's changing. What can we do? We should recycle. You know, they talk about those things at school, and they talk about those things at home. So, but I mean, the learning gap is something else that I worry about with the kids. The summer, there's something called the summer slide that happens with kids in the summertime, normal summertime, where kids can lose 1 to 2 months of their learning of what they've learned over the summer if it's not supplemented with something, right? And so kids around the country were out, and let's just face it, e-learning or the electronic virtual stuff that they were doing, they were throwing stuff together. Those kids weren't learning anything. So it's like 6 months that that we're going to have to make up and do something extra with. So that's something else that we need to really focus on as parents, is getting the kids assessed, making sure the assessments are sound, and then finding ways to help supplement them in an economic way as well, because all of us don't have the means to do that.
Dr. Kim, can I stay with that question though? Because in many places of the country, we came back this fall to distance learning, right? So that hasn't stopped. And now, you know, they are moving ahead and trying to do what they were doing in person over Zoom. Let's just call it Zoom. It's a different app for every school and sometimes for every class.
Right.
They're on Zoom. So I'm really worried both about the longer term learning loss, but also the pressure these kids are facing in real time. I mean, they're bored and it is boring, right? Like I'm struggling with how much do I want my 8-year-old to sit and pretend he is so engaged by this boring Zoom call.
Right, especially because so many of us during the week, we're on Zoom all day, and we know that it just gets tiring. And so there are days where we as adults may say, I'm not doing Zoom today. I'm doing all phone calls, but I'm not doing Zoom, but they don't have a choice. So how do we help them through that?
So
Go ahead, Dr. Sarah.
I was just going to say, one of the things that, I encourage people to do is take breaks, because at a certain point, it is diminishing returns. And rather than losing the whole 2 hours, it's better if you go take that 10 minutes and come back and you're ready to get to work. And that may be one of those times where you incorporate some of that movement in even a quick moment, and that can be useful. For children who are on special education plans and things like that, there may be ways that you could actually get the school to modify it so that your school day schedule looks a bit different. It is completely developmentally inappropriate to have a 6-year-old on Zoom for 7 hours at a time, which I know some school districts are doing. But even in the schools that have done something that's more in line with what we know about child development, it may be worth asking for those accommodations or those things to be put in place so that your child isn't penalized because they're at home. The other thing that I wanted to raise here, since we're talking about Black families in the Black community, is what that loss of learning could potentially mean when we finally go back to in-person instruction, which I'm sure will happen at some point. I'm not gonna make any guesses as to when that's going to be. But something I see all the time as a child psychiatrist who works with Black kids and Black families is that when the proper educational accommodations aren't in place, or when instruction doesn't match up with what a child knows or what they're capable of, the child is frustrated, they may act out, and rather than that being interpreted as an indicator that that child needs more support, it is seen as them being oppositional or difficult or disrespectful, and they end up getting a punitive response rather than a supportive response. And as a child psychiatrist, this is something that I sort of am worried about on the horizon, knowing that school budgets have been cut, mental health budgets have been cut, and when these kids do go back to school, you're going to have what is a worsening of pre-existing educational gaps and knowledge gaps between different kids from different households.
Yeah.
And not just that, like to your point, like it is definitely a class, conversation, here. It's like, oh, people, Dr. Kim, you just mentioned, like, you have created a pod, for your kids. I'm like, let me find a pod for mine. And then I'm like, I don't want to do that because I don't want to expose us to another family who might not be, implementing the same kind of social distancing. So let me find some other tools, another opportunity for my kid that I can afford and pay for. But for folks who don't have that luxury, right, to your point, Dr. Sarah, like we're creating this gap that already, I heard someone call this sort of Generation C, Generation COVID, and like how this generation is going to end up faring. Like I've talked to my mom a lot about this, and she's like, well, everybody's going through it. I'm like, but my kid is still in the middle of his first 5. I don't care about nobody else's first 5. Like from a global sense, I care, and that's the work that I do. But like, I'm trying to make sure that his first 5 are right and have, some resources at my fingertips, but a lot of families don't, particularly Black families. And we're seeing more and more the sort of gap that is, centered around, race that is just going to continue to get exacerbated. Judy does a lot of work around the sort of school to prison pipeline. And I'm just concerned, like to your point, Dr. Sarah, about what this moment is going to do to just create a deeper hole to climb out of. We've talked a little bit about Adrian and Judy's children being older than myself or Fatima's kids. Adrian, you sort of shared an anecdote earlier about your college age student and like how she's processing this moment. It might be helpful to sort of bring that perspective into the conversation.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of things actually that I was going to ask. I mean, I think one, I was sharing with you all how my daughter we have become her discussion group for all of her classes, right? So she goes to class and she comes downstairs and then she wants to talk through, right, her thinking, her theories, right, on everything that she's learning. And so I think there is a way in which, it is part of it is the isolation, right? I think that they're all experiencing. And the sort of related question that I had for each of you, and Dr. Kim, you had started to talk a little bit earlier about the physical manifestations of stress. And we see some of that too. And I think Dr. Sarah, you talked about making sure everyone's getting enough sleep. And we've seen sleep patterns be all over the place in our house, right? But there are some, I think, and I would ask you all to share with us and the folks who are watching, are there particular things that we should be looking out for that are flags during this period of time for how our children, whether they are little or they are teenagers like mine and Judy's, that we should be paying particular attention to, physical signs that maybe they are not okay, that they are not coping, that they are not managing?
So I think some of the big things that are easy things to look out for are eating patterns. whether they are eating excessively a lot or eating too little. Sleeping patterns, whether they're sleeping too much or sleeping too little. Those two things can be like a trigger to say, okay, something might be off. Kids saying that they actually have a headache. Some of the little ones will tell you, I have a headache. That might be a sign that they're worried, that a conversation needs to happen. Some of the other things that I see that are physical manifestations are people saying that my neck hurts. Like they'll say, my neck actually hurts. Well, that's a sign of tension. Tension headaches usually are right in the neck area when someone has a tension headache. So I know my 5-year-old will say, Mommy, my neck hurts, something's not right. And I've noticed that she'll start acting out more. She'll want more attention. And I think that is when we need to have a conversation. I need to play with them more. And like Adrienne, you said, your child just wants to actually talk things out. I thank God that I actually have two kids that are around the same age, so they can be friends with each other. At least they have each other. And so I worry about the kids who are by themselves with one parent. Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard because you have to be sometimes their sibling and their parent because they don't have a playmate. So Dr. Sarah, what do you think?
Yes, I agree with all of that. And whether we're dealing with a pandemic or social unrest or whatever, whenever I'm talking to groups of people in the community about signs of mental health problems, my first question is, do you know your child's baseline? Because the big thing is that you understand when there's a change in the baseline, but if you don't know their baseline, if you don't have that quality time with them, you're not going to recognize it until there's something dramatic that goes wrong. And you don't want that to be the point at which something happens to give them some additional help. And so knowing their baseline is really important. The other thing I'll say too that we're seeing is that kids who already had problems with anxiety or depression, or even the few kids I see who have issues with psychosis, at certain times during this period, I've seen really significant upticks in their symptoms. So they may have been doing okay, but now they're even more anxious. They're more sad. They're hearing more voices. And so, if your child has a history of mental health problems, checking in with them to see how they're going. And also, it may be a time to shore up their support. So, for some of the kids I see who I may be the person who prescribes their medication, I'm having conversations with families about, well, maybe they need to go back to doing therapy every week instead of therapy every other week. Who in their family is around who they have a good relationship with, could have some one-on-one time with them? Are there friends they can do FaceTime with? Things like that, that we want to put in place as well, because it always doesn't have to be, and often with kids, it isn't a clinical or medical solution. It's more about what's going on in their home and in their community, and realizing that right now we have to build community in different ways, because that need for community, that need for connection hasn't gone away, but we have to reconfigure how we provide that for ourselves and for the people in our family now that our sort of defaults have been taken away.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that point that are around like recreating, because I think, like there's, which is funny when you're talking about being in the same space, but being alone, right? Like my daughter, I swear, like those earphones are like, I think they're glued up in there, or she nailed them in there or something. And so like her, and you could sit there, you could be talking to her, she can't hear you because she's blasting that music so much in those earphones. But I also know of other kids who have drawn away, like in isolation in their rooms, right? And who don't come out, who may have been kind of introverts a little bit and are now, that it is, more extreme. And so I'm wondering, like, how do we, like, creating this new normal for them, right? Where the thing I'm worried about is that young people and even children, right, start not only the socialization, but also like the things that make them feel good about themselves. So if you're, my daughter's a basketball player, you're a tennis player, you're in school plays, you're, all of those things that just kind of give you the self-esteem and let children know that like they have these talents, but it's also fun for them. gives them their friends and their tribe. How do we recreate that? Like, like I have a nephew who's in a band. There's no band right now. How do we recreate those kinds of things?
And it may look like, you're going to the basketball court and trying to social distance, and maybe you're doing drills and you're part of a group and you're holding each other accountable about going 4 times a week and checking in with each other. You may not be able to play together, but you could play and then talk about playing and sort of hold each other accountable about continuing to increase your skills. And so, yeah, it is difficult. And I'll say, especially for adolescents who are figuring out, because in childhood, you're sort of learning your family and your rules and how to follow the rules and the basics. And then in adolescence, you're really starting to figure out how what you think may be different than what your parents think, and what your place not only is in your family, but your place in the world. So those extracurricular activities like basketball and school plays and debate club, they help them with that really important task of figuring out, what distinguishes them, what their talents are, sort of who their tribe is outside of their family. And so it is a significant loss for them not to have that in this moment, but there is an ability for, communities to form online. Not the same, but people can still have connections. And it's something that we saw young people doing even before COVID, where online allowed for the breaking down of geographical barriers. So if you were the only kid in this small town in Florida who was really into Black history, like, you were able to find other people that were young people that were into these things too. And so one of the things that we know about sort of social media and mental well-being, it's not all bad. And one of the things that is protective or that is associated with it actually doing good for children is when they are active participants. So if they're just on Instagram looking at everybody else's stuff and they're not engaging, they don't have a real community, and they're not sharing, then that is not as useful for them. And actually that has more negative outcomes compared to it being a place where they're finding people who they have genuine interest alignment with, and where they're actually like engaging and posting things, appropriate things, of course, themselves too.
It's funny that you mentioned the geographical breakdown, because for my son, my 12-year-old's birthday, we did a Black Panther watch party. And it enabled his cousin, who's like his really close buddy, but lives in Detroit, to be able to be at his birthday party. He's never been at his birthday party. And he, at the end of it, he was like, this was actually fun, which felt like high praise in time. So that's a helpful point. So I guess the last question before we move on that I have for you guys is, at some point, as you said, we hopefully will be on another side of this. And so because of that, I've been sort of thinking we can let this thing go, or that thing can, like, we don't have to live up to that. But is it better to sort of, if we're trying to maintain consistency and normalcy, to try to recreate all the things? Or is it better to just sort of say, we'll pick that up in a year?
Well, I think from an activity standpoint, one thing that the pandemic and the lockdown did was it made people really prioritize what really is important. So like, does your child need to be in 5 different activities outside of school? Because as Dr. Sarah said, do you really know your kid? Because after school, they wake up, they get up, they go to school, they're at school for, however many hours, then they go to practice, then they go do this, then they eat, then they go to bed. What type of conversation have you really had with that person outside of the weekend? Oh, but wait, the weekend, we have this game, this tournament, this, that. So I think that once we get back to face-to-face activities and really prioritizing which ones, and talking to your kid, which one do you really want to do? Let's do it well, and maybe pick 1 or 2, and then prioritize home time and family time on top of all of that. And like Dr. Sarah said, this has given my husband and his line brothers all of us are in different parts of the country, but we all had dinner together with our families. And we were able to do that via Zoom. And so we had the greatest conversation and laughed and joked. And we always talked about going away together as a big group, but we were able to do that. So continuing to do things like that, even with family that's away, I think is something that we should incorporate and see as a positive, and then see as a connection thing, because of all the other things that are going on in this country. Connections with other people is what's going to keep us together and keep us sane, I think. So.
Dr. Sarah?
Absolutely agree. And, I think letting some stuff go made sense when we thought this was going to be a month or two. Now that we know that is not the case, we have to, my word is re-equilibrate, right? Like we have to be intentional about re-equilibrating and finding a way to adaptively cope, because we are going to cope one way or another.
Right.
If we don't do it adaptively, then it's going to be maladaptively. And so rather than sort of letting it go and waiting to see what happens, proactively saying this is a very stressful time for the society, for my family, and therefore my child. And so this is a time when I'm going to build out the sort of coping, the sort of structure that I want them to have as they're contending with these unprecedented stressors.
Well, I could obviously talk to both of you guys for much, much longer. And I'm sure people who are watching are really engaged too. Thank you so much to Dr. Kim and Dr. Sarah for joining us and for your tips and ideas. And we will keep this conversation going for sure, because as you say, this pandemic wasn't a month or two, and we're going to be here for a while. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Tracy to talk about some things that I'm hoping are bringing us joy in this time.
Yes, I think the most epic battle ever is scheduled for this evening. Patti LaBelle versus Gladys Knight. Now, so if you've been living under a rock during COVID, you may not know about the versus battle. That is it initially started out as like a friendly competition between Timbaland and Swiss Beats, two very well-known and revered hip-hop producers. And they started by, getting their followers on Instagram to watch them sort of go, song by song, of the songs that they had produced that were like well-known and loved by folks. And it has turned into this like amazing cultural phenomenon, and it's sort of celebrating Black music. It's been all Black artists. And it's, the sort of rivalries that have existed, over the last 20 or 30 years for those of us sort of Gen Xers, most of the artists who have been a part of the sort of versus battle, Brandy and Monica, this past couple of weeks, it was the largest audience that they drew at 1.5 million viewers, but they've also had folks like Nelly and T.I., other folk. But this tonight, they got Miss Patti and Gladys. And, it's so interesting. Like, there's been memes that have been floating around like, oh, most of us are going to miss it because we're going to be spending time trying to make sure our mamas and aunties can get on, because it's traditionally streamed on Instagram. They've actually brokered a relationship with Apple Music. And so now you can also stream it via Apple or on YouTube. So they have a couple of ways in which you can watch it. I'll talk about that more. But I am curious, my SIP co-host, who you got? You got chicken and waffles, or you got Patty Pass? Like, who you rocking with, Team Patti or Team Gladys? I love me some Gladys, but I'm Team Patti tonight. I think Patty's got this hand. Her catalog, I'm rocking with Patti. Who you rocking with, Glenda?
I'm trying to rock with both because they're different, right?
That's true.
Right, extremely different. But I'm holding out. Everyone's going Patti because she's such a powerhouse. That Gladys, and at the end of the day, they gonna sing live. Y'all thinking they're gonna just listen to it? So that is where Gladys might sneak up, and they're gonna sing outside their catalog.
So I don't know. So Gladys, if you saw, they did these like little promos, which again,
this is the whole
hilarious.
This is like Tyson Holyfield, like they are building this, which
What
is
you got?
what you got, right? And so both of them are well known for like their culinary skills. So like the little clips that they did were them, Gladys is in the kitchen making a banana pudding, and then they show Patty's like made a whole spread, and she's like, "What are you bringing to dinner?" So I suspect that the way that they're probably going to be in the same place tonight, and they probably made this like big spread of food, which I think is going to be amazing. But I don't know. Gladys in the short promo, I don't know if she's doing too well. She had been sick for a while. So I think it's going to be interesting. This has been built up as like a versus battle, but really a celebration. I think the best part of this, I think, is going to be the storytelling that the two of them are going to do tonight. Judy, who you got tonight?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, most of these versus battles do turn into like not battles, right? Like they are love fests, which is wonderful, which is what we need. But, I went to school in Philly. So, I mean, Patty all day. I mean, it's hands down. And I want Patty's spread, because that food that Patty had versus that little banana pudding, like I'm at Patty's spread.
Well, that is why I think this is gonna be interesting, because Patty don't know how to bring it back. Like,
no, that's why I love her. She extra. She can't help it. I love it.
And
everything.
So, Gladys is respectable. She's like, had y'all told me I could do more than a banana pudding.
I think she knew. And Patty was like, well, you should have just been extra like
and
me.
I feel like Patty's she's just gonna dominate.
Oh no, Adrian, who you got?
Well, you all know I'm like laughing and nodding my head as if I know anything about any of what y'all are talking about. So like, oh yeah, the verses, they're not really battles. So I don't know. I mean, I want to say Patty for all the reasons that you all said, but also there was so I don't know if it's been a part of the promo, but there have been these like video clips of them performing in the past together. And so there was one on Oprah, right, with Gladys and Patty and Dion singing Superwoman. And I don't know if you all saw that one, but I thought that Patty was gonna dominate because she's just so powerful. But Gladys kept pulling her back and just moving ahead, right? And I was like, oh, Gladys is the lead and they're backup, right? So I don't know. I think Gladys might surprise y'all.
So one of the Pips is a Detroiter, so I've got like love in my heart for like Gladys. I mean, they're just two. I joked with a friend that they are the original Brandy and Monica. Like, this is an old rivalry. They started this thing.
This is a master class for every singer.
Oh yeah, I'm making, my daughter wants to be a singer professional. I was like, you're watching tonight. I know you don't want to watch, but you are going to watch.
First of all, they're gonna be dressed.
That's right. Dressed. I mean, she had on white cooking whatever she was cooking in this little video. I was like,
I will say this,
white Afghan cooking.
I will say this, Patty does scream a little too much for me. Like I'm not like she's that kind of singer, so sometimes she does a little too much of that. Whereas Gladys is like smooth and just, sultry. So I don't know. Fatima,
and I suspect there's gonna be they're gonna throw shade. Like y'all young people don't know about the shade.
I want the stories. So I think the stories are gonna win the night.
Yeah.
I have this dream. What if they start singing Lady Marmalade together? Like,
that's what I think, because they're gonna sing like Brandy and Monica were like, they were singing under their breath.
Like, we didn't even talk about that foolery.
They're not gonna sing Lady Marmalade.
We're gonna mess without you. So
we tried to talk about it, Tracy, but
yeah, see, I missed that part. It was so sad. I mean, what was sad about it is like Brandy is your traditional sort of awkward Black girl, and it was clear that she was an actual fan of Monica's, and Monica was like, "Girl, stop," right? And so
I'm just like Jill. That was like
right. That was like Jill. She was an actual fan, and Erica gave her that same energy. And so I am curious, like tonight, who's gonna show up as Mean Girl? Like, my money is on Gladys. I don't know. I think Patty is very personable, and that's why she's larger than life.
I don't think Patty's too much into Patty to be the mean girl.
But she will throw some shade.
Yeah. Oh, she will. She will.
You know, what I think is interesting though about both of them and their trajectories and careers, like there have been, and sort of looking at this moment now where we're seeing artists and athletes sort of stepping off the sidelines and utilizing their platforms around Black power, Black empowerment, Black liberation. Like neither of them, at least to my knowledge, right, have been very vocal about advocacy. Like they've never really used their platforms for that. So I'm really interested if at all tonight any conversation about what's happening in the world shows up and how they vocalize support and or not. Like I suspect that they've probably given and contributed and right, but that has never been a part of their their brand, as it were. Right. I don't know. Have any of you ever heard?
I don't know, but I suspect that, I mean, I'm just trying to put them in the context, right? These are women who were big, who broke through as Black women in music in the 70s and 80s. They were surely underpaid. I don't even have to see.
Like, well, we already know that.
Right. They made less than what their records did and their influence at the time. It would be really interesting. Maybe they'll get into it tonight, because it would be really interesting to talk about at that time what it meant to buck systems. And music is such a conservative space anyway, versus now. What are the risks that they were taking and what did they experience? Tell the stories.
Tell the stories. I want to hear the stories. I mean, it's been interesting.
To stick on the activism thing, I suspect that they were active, but we also have to recognize in the 60s and 70s, it was harder to have a platform, right?
They didn't have social media.
And they weren't doing
and for Black women in particular.
Well, yeah, and doing The View,
right?
But to assume that, as you know, many Black women were sitting at tables making decisions, or I suspect fueling the movement, and the ones that were the very architects barely got like any shine. So I just throw.
I'm really curious to hear stories that might incorporate like some of that behind the scenes. I mean, when Aretha died, there were all kinds of stories that folks stood up and told about.
Her making phone calls.
That's right, literally. Or feeding folks or having people over to the house. Just like really fueling some of that. So I'm excited.
I'd be interested in seeing, for those who are watching, who y'all got.
Yeah. Some people have been saying, the other question I had that I think, Glenda, you talked about last week when we were talking about Monica and Brandy, was who shows up at the verses, who shows up in the comments, right? So that's the other thing I would ask you all, is who you think showing up?
Michelle is always there. Michelle's always there, and then of course Joe Biden shows up with
Kamala making a guest appearance. And what I think is also interesting about this, I've been going back and forth with friends, and they're like, "Oh, they're not gonna pull the numbers." I'm like, "You're crazy."
Intergenerational.
This is intergenerational. Yeah. Everybody from the music industry is gonna be excited to see this, because like we have not had this kind of intimate space, right, where they can have this kind of conversation that is like not scripted in some ways. So I think it's gonna be who's who shows.
Now, what they've won is the pre-promo.
Oh yeah, that pre-promo.
Right. Oh, definitely.
They set the bar for that. Like,
but Tracy used to tell people, so I'm gonna be a little embarrassed, because I was on Twitter and people were talking about, oh, I gotta set this up for my mother and all.
All right, so
I'm
here's
on Instagram.
Wow, somebody mama.
Apparently, how do you show it?
Here are all the ways you can do this.
How do I get it on my TV set?
Okay, so to get it on your TV set, if you have Apple TV.
You have a TV, first of all.
Well, if you got a TV, you can go to Apple TV, and the iTunes section of Apple TV is where it'll be the first thing I suspect that pops up once you click on the iTunes app within your Apple TV. That's one way. Another is, if you want to watch it on your television, if you have the YouTube TV app downloaded, you can then go to the Versus channel and you can stream it from your television, right? So if you want to watch,
Come through, Tracy, with your tutorial. I'm all
I'm like, because when I'm done with this, I got to call my mama and get her set up. I tried to get her
your
set up.
mama's watching right now.
Listen,
Hey,
I know she watching. I had to get her set up for Teddy and Babyface, and then she was like, "Ooh, they talking too much," so she didn't watch the whole thing. So now I got to go back and set her back up. But if you just want like watch it on your phone or your tablet, you can go to Instagram, and if you follow Miss Patty, which I do, like on social media, she'll be streaming it. You'll click on the little thing up top and it'll say live, and then it'll take you to the show. Same thing for Gladys on her Instagram, and the Versus, that's VERZUZ Versus, and you click
what
on
time is it?
It's at 8 p.m. Eastern. And so usually they're about 2 hours and some change. The Monica and Brandy thing ran for about 3 hours. It was long.
Wow.
They've been running longer. I'm shocked that they didn't do this one a little earlier, given the sort of seasoned audience.
I'm gonna be asleep. Me right here.
I'm like, I should have still never go back. But I feel like, I think that they're gonna go long because
I think what's gonna be great is that they're consummate performers. They're
put on the show.
They can go
They're gonna
forever.
sing. They're gonna sing live. You watch
on the show. I know. I'm excited. So we would love to hear from folks on Wednesday how you thought the versus battle went. I'm excited about it. I gotta go make my mac and cheese. I will say Miss Patty got this blackberry cobbler, y'all. Listen, that blackberry cobbler, I don't know about that pie, but that other pie.
Everyone's cooking though. I've been seeing people
every
posting about what they're cooking. Everyone's cooking black eyed peas. Everyone's cooking greens. Like
soul food night. I will say, I've been wanting to go to Gladys's chicken and waffles place. I know we get ready to wrap up, but on this coronavirus tip, I was sharing with folks that they just shared that over half of new coronavirus cases are people who contracted the virus while dining in a restaurant. So listen, over half of the new cases that are emerging because people decide they want to go sit inside some restaurant and eat. Like, I want to taste Gladys chicken and waffles, but not that bad, boo. Not that bad.
That's why they have takeout.
Get you some.
And yes, I got the judgmental auntie thing. Like,
oh yeah, that's go get you a patty pie and get your chicken and waffles to go.
Well, you know what? I didn't even think about this. I'm gonna cook it tonight. You know what? My brother makes every Christmas. Miss Patty's seafood mac and cheese, honey.
Oh, is it
It
good?
gave me a heart attack though. We won't even talk about the butter stick.
Well, she's doing, like, she started yesterday because I love her. I've been following her forever. On her Facebook, she's like, I'm gonna show you what I'm making tonight. And so one of the things she had was fried corn. Literally 2 sticks of butter this woman put. I was like, ooh.
I thought she was supposed to be like on a light diet because she had.
I mean, I respect her. Like, when I'm cooking for other people, it's gonna be good. For myself, I may not use 2 sticks of butter,
but I'm gonna use one.
That's what my brother says at Christmas. Don't ask, don't tell.
That's right.
About how many butter sticks are in the spread.
That's right. Me and my Kara gold. So, anyway, tonight, 8 p.m.
Tracy, remind me.
I got you.
Text me.
I'm gonna send you a link. I got you.
I'm gonna be working all day on getting it on my TV set.
I'm gonna try to get it on my TV set too. I never thought. This is me.
Well, so
Right.
I have a versus squad. Shout out to Antoine, Anthony, and Nadina. We've been watching these all together since they first started. We have a little Zoom situation, and I'll stream it on, and we'll talk back and forth. It's been a great, when we talk about like trying to create community, it's been a great thing that I've done with friends.
That's great.
Since the pandemic started. So, Adrian,
Yes.
final words.
So I'm excited. Glenda said this a week or so, maybe a couple weeks ago. I'm excited because I got in the mail today or yesterday my vote by mail application. So the system is sort of working. I'm gonna fill it out and turn it in tomorrow, and then we'll see in terms of getting the ballot back. But I'm excited that it came.
So this is your request. This is
the request, not the ballot itself, but the application, which is fine. That's what New York was supposed to do. So I got that. I'll turn it in immediately. But I do think that it's important. One of the things that we know is that in North Carolina, we talked about the ballots or the ballots went out on September 4th. People have started voting. The rejection rate of African-American ballots is really high. It's about 7% right now, compared to under 1% for white voters. And so one of the things I want to say that folks should, if you are in wherever you are, you've requested a ballot, and when they start to come to your home, remember to follow all of the instructions. The rejection rate mostly is about people not having a signature of a witness. And so in North Carolina, your state may be different.
Every state,
but in North Carolina, you have to have a witness signature, and people don't have it. And so as we think about this, right, we need to make sure that we are helping and educating people. Judy and I talked about this before, about making sure that people have the information that they need to be able to fill out their ballots properly if they're going to do vote by mail. And that's really, really, really critical. In North Carolina, they're allowing you to cure or to fix it. Right, so they will let you know, they will send you another ballot. So there's a way to fix it if you forgot to get a signature. But people really need to pay close attention to what you need to do when your ballot comes and fill it out properly.
I just filled out the online request for my absentee ballot here in Georgia. I had to fill it out 3 times because it kept rejecting my information that I was putting in the same way every time. On the 3rd time, and my husband tried to do it, he got rejected as well the first. I was like, keep trying. And what on the news this morning, they were saying they are rejecting ballots because the signature on your absentee ballot is not what they have on file. So look at your license, remember how you signed your name there, because that is exactly, they're going to be matching that. So these are the little voter suppression tactics that are going to continue to show up. And we need to make sure that people understand that if you're going to do it by mail, there are some specific protocols that you're going to need to follow in order to make sure that your vote counts.
Yep.
Well, I don't know who's supposed to close, but I will. Thank you for spending the last hour with Sunday Brunch with Higher Heights, hosted by the SIP. And your SIP hosts are Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, Fatima Goss-Graves from the National Women's Law Center, Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project, Tracy Sturdivant from the League, and I am Higher Heights. I'm Glenda Carr from Higher Heights. And
what's in a cup?
And y'all gonna see us in the comments tonight with Gladys Knight and Patty LaBelle. So see y'all at 8:00 tonight. And then we'll be back here on Wednesday at 2:00 Eastern for the SIP Power Hour lunch. Have a good afternoon.
Well.